Katara and Sokka meet their father's right-hand man in what I say, without qualification, is the single worst episode of this entire show. This is Avatar Explained for episode 115, Bato of the Water Tribe. Part 1, Synopsis. Team Avatar meets up with Bato, who is recovering after being badly burned. Bato takes them in and treats Katara and Sokka to the Water Tribe food and Water Tribe customs they have not enjoyed for a very long time. Aang feels left out, and he's upset that he's not the center of attention anymore. So, what he does, and I'm being completely serious about this, is when he receives a map showing the way to Sokka and Katara's father, Hakoda, he hides it. He doesn't tell them about it. No, I'm not joking. He constantly lies and constantly deceives. And just to hammer in the point more, the show has him get the trust mark when Team Avatar goes off ice dodging with Bato, which is a traditional Water Tribe coming-of-age ritual, apparently. The show really wants you to know how bad Aang is, and how morally unjust he's being by doing this. It is paying no attention to the idea that the Aang who has been introduced for the past 14 episodes would never do this. When the truth gets out, Katara and Sokka do something that is somehow even more out of character. They leave him behind. Yes, again, I'm not kidding. They say, "Oh yeah, Avatar, Aang, you've saved us time and time again, and you're the prophesized hero of the world, and we need you to stop the Fire Nation and this war that's been raging for a century, but oh, you lied to us, so we're just gonna leave you behind and go with Bato." And at least Aang is framed as having done something bad. The show frames it like there's nothing wrong with what Sokka and Katara are doing. It pretends like this is just fine. It pretends that this is normal. It pretends that this is acceptable. But it's not. At all. As the episode progresses, Aang and Sokka and Katara eventually have to fight a bounty hunter, June, sent by Zuko, and they win, and they reconcile, and everything's good, and everyone pretends that this episode was not a complete waste of time. Everyone pretends that this was not a terribly written episode with some of the worst characterization I have ever seen in a show of this quality. Part 2. Analysis. This episode just plain does not make any sense. I don't mean on a logical standpoint. I wouldn't mind if it was illogical, and I think people do get too caught up on logical inconsistencies and don't think of shows enough in terms of character and theme, which in my mind matter a lot more than plot holes and nonsense like that. So, yeah, let's talk about the characters and themes here. The themes are overwrought, they're ham-fisted, they are so poorly written that I almost forgot I was watching a show that brought me such powerful episodes as The Storm and The Blue Spirit just a few episodes before this. It's an after-school special, basically. It's a 22-minute long after-school special about how lying is bad, and you shouldn't deceive your friends. And if your friends decide to leave you after you've deceived them, even though you're the hope for the world, that's perfectly fine and acceptable, and it's a testament to them if they forgive you. I'm sorry guys, I don't normally like going off on rants like this. I hate YouTube channels that are just predicated around angry, bitter rants, but it's hard for me to react otherwise when I'm watching this episode. I don't say things like this because I hate Avatar. I say things like this because I love Avatar, and I hate seeing how a show I've come to care so much about is so pathetically destroyed. I hate to see characters I've grown to love and care about ruined with such blithe, unconcerned idiocy. These people do not care. They do not understand the characters. They do not understand who these people are and what they want and why they want it. They've squished these characters into the thinnest, most simplistic, most banal version of themselves. And honestly, if that was all it was, I'd grit my teeth and say okay. But even by the standards of showing the most simplistic aspects of these characters, this episode is a failure. Aang would not behave as he behaves in this episode. Sokka and Katara would not behave as they behave in this episode. Hell, Iroh would not behave as he behaves in this episode. This is the most meat-headed, silly, sexist Iroh storyline ever. And by that I of course mean Iroh is the sexist here, which I don't know if that's completely inconsistent with his characterization. He does give Azula a doll from Ba Sing Se, whereas he gives Zuko a very nice dagger. I suppose I'd be more willing to forgive this idea of Iroh if the execution was better, but again, the execution is terrible, the writing is shallow, it's meaningless, it's petty. You can normally depend on Zuko to make an episode more exciting and interesting, but he's as stiff and stale and one-dimensional as I have ever seen him. I don't recognize these people. I don't recognize this world. The animation is still beautiful, I'll give it that. There are some good things about this episode. The battle sequence is fine. This is Avatar: The Last Airbender after all. Even the worst episodes still have some redeeming qualities. But from a writing standpoint, this is just awful. The Great Divide is a bad episode by Avatar standards. This is just a bad episode. The first time I watched this episode, I didn't feel personally like no longer watching the show, but I don't blame anyone for feeling that way. However, if you are watching this show for the first time and you are considering giving up on it after this episode or this episode in The Fortune Teller or this The Fortune Teller and The Great Divide, please know that this show will get better. It does not stay like this. There are bad episodes in the future. I will not sugarcoat that, but there are no episodes this bad, this shallow. I looked up the writer for Bato of the Water Tribe, and sure enough, it's someone who wrote no other episode of the show. That does not surprise me one bit. This episode is just so out of character. It's so inconsistent with everything else we see, and it's so much worse for it. I understand how you could defend The Great Divide, although I personally would not defend it. However, I do not see how anyone could defend this episode. It makes me hate all the characters, but more than that, it makes me hate the writers. It makes me hate everyone who said, "This is fine, this is good, this is an episode we are comfortable with pushing, this is a direction we want the show to go in." At the end of the day, it's just one episode out of 61. It's a low the show will never reach again, but it is a low. There's no sugarcoating it. This is a terrible episode. I'd probably give it a D. Not an F. Again, it's not abysmal, but a D. This is not acceptable. It colors my perception of Bato. I can't take Bato seriously again because every time I see the character, I think of this episode. And honestly, I'm not as angry as maybe I'm acting like. I'm more disappointed. I'm more melancholic and saddened. Part 3. Context. It plagues me to say this, but Bato of the Water Tribe is unfortunately quite an important episode of Avatar. It's not one you can skip. If you skip The Great Divide, well, I don't think you should. I think you should watch every episode of this show. But if you skip The Great Divide, you're not missing anything. The episode ultimately matters very little. It contributes very little to the whole of the show. That cannot be said of Bato of the Water Tribe, which not only introduces a character, Bato, whom we see again in Season 2, but also June, the bounty hunter, who, yes, is cool, and yes, is the best part of this episode, but she's still a part of this episode, and I can't think of her without thinking of this episode. So that's the reason I don't like June as much as some people do. And she comes back near the very end of the show, when Zuko is trying to track down Aang. June says she can't track down Aang because he doesn't exist. They wonder if this means he's dead, and she's like, no, it means he doesn't exist. He's gone. And they're all mystified. So Zuko instead has her track down Uncle Iroh, whom Zuko, viewing Iroh as a positive role model by this time, views as the only other person who can defeat the Fire Lord and end his reign of tyranny and terror. She calls Zuko and Katara a couple there, like she does in this episode. And in all, she's not unlikable, but I'd probably prefer her if she was introduced in a better episode. Also, one more note, there is one more thing about this episode that comes back, and it's Aang's dislike of Water Tribe food and Water Tribe customs. And I find this a little disappointing. Now, to a certain extent it's reasonable. Aang is a vegetarian, and there is a lot of meat in Water Tribe food, so naturally that is not going to be appealing to him. But Water Tribe food isn't all meat, so Aang's vegetarianism cannot account for his dislike of Water Tribe food. Aang isn't obliged to like the food of the Water Tribe, of course. It doesn't make him a bad person or anything, but since he normally considers himself so open-minded and generous, it is a little unfortunate that he won't even give Water Tribe food much of a chance, and he doesn't really have the respect of Water Tribe customs that one would expect of him. In episode 308, the Puppet Master, just being around all this Water Tribe stuff makes him a little uncomfortable. It makes Toph uncomfortable too, but she's Toph. That's who she is. Aang is supposed to be different, and he's not. Now, is that a major problem with this episode? No, not at all. It probably would not even rank on the top 50 problems with this episode. And that's the issue. There are so many things wrong here. They stack and stack and stack until you can't even see the elements of this episode that are good, like the fight scenes and the animation. There's a little bad in a lot of Avatar episodes, but here the bad is just so overwhelming. The stench is so overpowering that you can't smell the sweet scents, can't smell the pleasant aromas. Ultimately, that's why I just feel a deep emptiness in my stomach when I'm done watching this episode. It's the same thing I feel when I finished watching the Avatar movie for the first time. It wasn't that I expected it to be good, it's that I didn't expect it to be this bad, and I didn't expect it to miss the point so much. This is not the show I love. It's not recognizable in the least. So thank you for watching. I'm sorry if that got a bit ranty, but I tell myself always to be honest, and the honest truth is that I do not like this episode. I don't like it at all, and I don't think it gets the criticism it really should. So anyway, like, comment, subscribe. If you liked what you saw today, donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more Avatar Explained videos like this. Even $1 a month really helps. It really goes a long way. Watch more Avatar. It is a fantastic show. This episode excluded. And tune in very soon for the next Avatar Explained video. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.